In the year 1750, the British colonies along the eastern seaboard of North America stretched like a patchwork quilt from the icy shores of New Hampshire to the humid lowlands of Georgia. Over 1 million souls called this land home, a vibrant mix of English farmers, Scots, Irish frontiersmen, German settlers tilling Pennsylvania's fertile valleys, and enslaved Africans whose labor built the tobacco fields of Virginia and the rice plantations of the Carolinas. Life pulsed with the rhythm of seasons, merchants haggling in Philadelphia's markets, fishermen hauling cod from the Grand Banks, and families gathering in log cabins under starlit skies. Yet beneath this daily toil, forces were stirring, forces that would one day unravel the ties to the mother country across the Atlantic. Imagine standing in the narrow streets of New York City on a crisp March evening. Gas lamps flicker to life as the curtain rises at the theater on Nassau Street. For the first time on American soil, actors tread the boards in a production of Shakespeare's Richard III, their voices echoing lines of ambition and betrayal. This was no mere entertainment, it was a spark. Colonists, weary of provincial isolation, glimpsed a wider world of ideas and culture. Newspapers buzzed with announcements, drawing crowds from taverns and counting houses. In that moment, the colonies began to see themselves not as distant outposts, but as a stage for their own dramas. Across the ocean, Britain hummed with invention. The Industrial Revolution, often dated to this very year, ignited in the smoky forges of Derbyshire and the spinning mills of Lancashire. James Watt tinkered with steam engines, and ironmasters like Abraham Darby perfected smelting techniques that would power factories for generations. For the colonies, this meant opportunity and chains in equal measure. British goods flooded American ports, cheaper textiles and tools that undercut local craftsmen, while colonial raw materials like timber and furs flowed back to fuel the empire's engines. Trade boomed, with exports to Britain tripling since the turn of the century, but it came at a cost. Mercantilist laws like the Navigation Acts funneled wealth to London, leaving colonial economies tethered like ships at anchor. No law embodied this tension more starkly than the Iron Act, passed by Parliament on June 24th. Colonial ironworks thriving in places like Princeton, New Jersey, and Taunton, Massachusetts, had begun producing nails, tools, and even cannons, but Britain feared competition. The Act slashed duties on raw pig iron shipped to England, encouraging extraction from American mines, while banning new slitting mills and steel furnaces in the colonies. It aimed to keep the New World a supplier, not a rival. Colonists grumbled in assembly halls from Boston to Charleston. Why bind our hands when our land yields such bounty? One Virginia planter might have asked. Though enforcement was lax at first, the act planted seeds of resentment, whispering that Britain's embrace was more vise than hug. By decade's end, colonial iron production would surge anyway, defying the law and forging a spirit of quiet defiance. Religion, too, stirred the colonial soul in 1750, riding the aftershocks of the Great Awakening, a fervent wave of revivals that had swept the colonies since the 1730s. Preachers like Jonathan Edwards in Northampton, Massachusetts, and George Whitefield, whose itinerant sermons drew thousands, had challenged stale church hierarchies and ignited personal faith. By 1750, the fire still burned. In rural meeting houses, congregants wept and shouted under thunderous calls to repentance, blurring lines between old denominations and birthing new ones, like the separate Baptists in the South. This movement democratized belief, empowering ordinary folk, farmers, artisans, even enslaved people, to question authority, whether clerical or crown. It fostered a sense of individual liberty that would echo in revolutionary pamphlets 2 decades later. Among African Americans, exposed through plantation revivals, it sparked early glimmers of resistance, as spiritual equality clashed with earthly bondage. But liberty was a fragile dream for the hundreds of thousands enslaved in the colonies, where 1 in 5 residents toiled in chains. The transatlantic slave trade, a brutal triangle of greed spanning Europe, Africa and America, reached fever pitch in the mid-1700s. British ships, like the ones docking in Charleston that summer, disgorged captives snatched from West African coasts, men, women and children, packed like cargo in the Middle Passage's hellish holds. In 1750 alone, thousands arrived in the Carolinas and Virginia, their labor fueling the export of rice and indigo that enriched British merchants. The trade's horrors, dysentery, floggings, suicides from the rails, scarred generations, yet it bound the colony's economy to human suffering. Rebellions flickered, as in Curaçao that July, where enslaved people rose against their captors, a distant echo that colonial planters ignored at their peril. Westward, the frontier beckoned with promise and peril. On April 13th, Dr. Thomas Walker and his party, funded by Virginia speculators, pushed through the Cumberland Gap, a notch in the Appalachian Mountains that would become a gateway to Kentucky and beyond. They named the river they crossed the Cumberland, after the British Duke, and charted lands teeming with buffalo and towering oaks. This expedition wasn't mere adventure, it was conquest in ink and compass. Native nations like the Cherokee and Shawnee watched warily as surveyors mapped their hunting grounds, while French traders from the north eyed the same Ohio Valley. Tension simmered. Just a month earlier, on April 25th, British forces torched the Acadian village of Beaubassin in Nova Scotia, forcing French-speaking settlers to flee across the Missaguash River border. This was no isolated skirmish. It signaled the gathering storm of imperial rivalry. France, with forts dotting the Great Lakes and Mississippi, claimed vast interiors the British coveted for fur and farmland. In the Ohio country, both powers wooed the Iroquois and Delaware, trading muskets for alliances. By autumn 1750, rumors swirled of French reinforcements marching south, while Virginia's Governor Dinwiddie plotted counter-moves. These border frictions, ignored in London salons, would erupt 4 years later in the French and Indian War, a colonial theatre of the global 7 Years' War that would bankrupt Britain and radicalize her subjects. As winter blanketed the colonies in snow, another milestone warmed Williamsburg's taverns. On November 11th, at the Raleigh Tavern, students from the College of William and Mary founded the FHC Society, or Flat Hat Club, the first collegiate secret society in America. Cloaked in ritual and debate, it gathered young minds to ponder philosophy, politics, and punch. Here, amid toasts to liberty, the seeds of elite networks took root, networks that would one day sign the Declaration of Independence. 1750 was a pivot, a year of quiet convergences. Cultural blooms challenged isolation. Economic edicts bred grievance. Religious fires kindled autonomy. Enslaved voices murmured defiance, and frontier probes ignited rivalries. From New York stages to the Appalachian wilds, colonists glimpsed a destiny beyond the king's shadow. The world turned. Britain industrialized, Europe schemed, Africa bled, and America, in its colonial cradle, began to stir. What began as ripples in 1750 would swell into the torrent of revolution, reshaping not just a nation, but the very arc of human freedom.